Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody here and welcome everybody to our 2024 Watershed Talks. My name is Christine Curry, and I'm the outreach coordinator of the Izaak Walton League State Division of Iowa. And we have our president, Dale Braun, with us this evening. Dale, you want to say a quick hi?
I'll say hi. I recognize a few names on the list. It's great. James, glad to have you here. And I'm looking forward to this presentation because I do not like a carbon pipeline. So take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Dale. This evening, we're going to be talking about that CO2 pipeline and the hazards and the power of people. It really is about the power of people. How landowners unite in Iowa to protect their land and property rights from the hazardous CO2 pipeline. This evening, we are super privileged and honored to have Emma Schmit with us from Bold Alliance, and Chris Henning, our Greene County community organizer, and much more. She's actually one of the State Division board members and serves on several other boards of nonprofits and other agriculture organizations. And without further...
Come in.
Oh, Dan, I'm going to mute you. If you could all just mute, and then we'll have a question answer time afterwards. But without further ado, I'm going to let Emma take it away, and she's going to give us a great background on the history of this pipeline going through Iowa and other states, and then we'll talk about the recent developments in Greene County and Guthrie County with Chris Henning and her community efforts.
Awesome. So hopefully you guys can see the presentation if I did it right. All right, hot dog. So I'm Emma Schmit. I work for Bold Alliance, and we are an organization that helps communities with legal representation, technical information and report writing, and in general, just organizing on the ground to stop pipelines that are potentially going to harm our communities, our land, our water, that sort of thing. I've been in this position for about a year now, so it's exciting stuff. Although we've been fighting the Summit carbon pipeline for much longer than that, I think we're just about at year 3. But before I dive in too deep about Summit specifically, I thought I'd give just kind of a brief overview of what this technology is a part of, what it all, why it exists really, I guess. So to start off with, let me just go to the next slide. So carbon pipelines are just one part of a larger system that is known as carbon capture and storage. Sometimes it's called carbon capture and sequestration. Sometimes it's CCS or CCUS or CCTUS. It's all sorts of different names, but we generally just go with carbon capture and storage. So what that process is it starts off by collecting carbon from a polluting entity. Usually we see it and with the Summit pipeline connected with ethanol plants, but you can really capture carbon from a whole lot of different industries, from steel to cement to fertilizer. If you can dream of it, they're going to try and do it. Once they've captured that carbon, then they end up pressurizing it to a very extreme amount. And so the carbon actually turns from a gas into what is called a supercritical fluid. And so what that means is that it's not technically a gas, but it's not technically a liquid either. It kind of has properties of both. And that just makes it a bit more unstable, a little bit more volatile. But they do that because it's kind of the easiest way to ultimately transport the carbon, because the next step after they've captured it is to put it through a pipeline generally. I mean, there are instances where they are able to sequester it right on site, but especially with the Summit pipeline, we are talking about basically the largest carbon capture pipeline in the entire world. We've never seen anything on this scale before. And that is one of the reasons that people have really come out to speak against this project, is because of the pipeline that's associated with it and the associated eminent domain claims and things like that. But getting back to the slide, after it's going through this pipeline, the intended goal is to then sequester it underground. So with Summit, they're going to, they say, sequester it underground in North Dakota. In the past, usually we saw carbon pipelines used for enhanced oil recovery, which is a process where it's kind of like fracking, where they just inject the carbon into the ground and it helps bring up kind of the last dregs of oil from a nearly depleted oil field, which I think also all of these pictures are like real life examples. I was really proud of myself for finding them and making them all pretty. So this screen shows you all of the active CO2 pipelines. There are around 5,000 or so miles of carbon pipeline in the United States right now. As you can see, most of that is situated in the Permian Basin over in West Texas. And that is because, like I said, typically we see carbon pipelines being used for the purpose of enhanced oil recovery. The first carbon pipeline was developed way back in 1972. So it has been around a while, but we'll talk about this a little bit more later. The industry kind of likes to tell us that they're very safe and this is a proven technology. I would probably personally disagree with that, just because we have seen quite a fair amount of different ruptures and leaks and just different incidences on this pretty limited amount of carbon pipeline. So if you like compare the 5,000 miles of carbon pipeline in the US, there's like 3 million miles of natural gas pipeline. So 5,000 miles really isn't very much. It's pretty low as far as that goes, I guess, in terms of when you compare it to other pipelines. But we are unfortunately probably going to see this expand, because there is a huge push to build out the carbon pipeline structure within the infrastructure within the United States. So if we look at this map, you can see this is just the most recent map that we saw of proposed facilities where they would like to start capturing carbon. And most of these are trying to sequester on site, I would say, but there are certainly, like we look at Iowa, certainly places where it requires quite a large bit of infrastructure in the form of carbon pipelines. We've seen this kind of massive build out proposed for decades now. It really didn't become like a mainstream thing until maybe 5-10 years ago, though. But even going back to like the 80s, Iowa has pretty much always been a hub for the transportation network because of just our position within the country, and then our position within different sites that are like good for geological sequestration. And also because now we have all these ethanol plants that make it pretty easy to capture the CO2, because ethanol, unlike, an industry like cement or steel, the carbon that they emit, it's pretty pure, so they don't have to go filter out all sorts of other, pollutants from the carbon before they put it through the pipeline. So that makes it cheaper, and as a result, it makes them kind of target Iowa. And if you take a look at the yellow map of just Iowa, those are all the different facilities where they could potentially connect a pipeline and capture carbon from those locations too. Most of those, the yellow, those are all ethanol plants. Then I think there's a few power plants and maybe a steel plant. I could be making that up, so I'm not even gonna finish that thought. But anyways, if we want to talk just about the Summit pipeline, this is kind of just your general overview. So like I said, there's 5,000 miles of existing CO2 pipeline. Summit, they've never, ever operated, maintained, constructed anything, any sort of pipeline of any kind before. They are now proposing to increase that number all on their own by 50%, because they want to build a 2,500 mile pipeline. And it will stretch from Iowa, Nebraska, both of the Dakotas, and Minnesota, if we allow them to, which fortunately we have seen their project denied in both South Dakota and North Dakota. They are pushing to turn that over. They did just finish a new round of hearings and presentations to up in North Dakota, and they have not yet issued a ruling, but we will see. Hopefully they'll stand strong and, notice that Summit really hasn't changed anything since they first denied their permit, and we won't have to deal with this, but we'll see. Other things to kind of note about it, just like I said, it is highly pressurized. It's operating at their like maximum pressure is 2,183 pounds per square inch, but it's also that kind of varies. Like on average, I want to say they expect it to be operating at like 2,150 psi. So still very, very pressurized. One of the things that we hear them mention a lot when we talk about kind of the safety, and I'll dive into this just a little bit more in a second, but we hear them mention a lot that there was a rupture down in Satarsha, Mississippi back in 2020, and it ended up sending 49 people to the hospital because carbon is kind of dangerous. But they would rather have us believe that it wasn't carbon, but hydrogen sulfide that actually made people sick and continues to force like ill effects on them to this day. But that's not the truth, frankly. But the thing is also, they say that their carbon pipeline is much safer because it's not going to have hydrogen sulfide. Except we did recently find out in some of their applications up in North Dakota, it will be transporting hydrogen sulfide. It's a pretty small amount, but it is still, regardless of what they say, hydrogen sulfide being moved through their pipeline. And it is just kind of compounds the fact that this is one pretty untested, pretty unsafe technology. And also that they're not being entirely transparent when it comes to what their goal is, what they're even moving through this pipeline. And that lack of transparency also extends to who actually owns the pipeline and who their investors are. We know that they have around 400 and some investors as of like their last filing with the SEC, but we only actually know of like a small handful of who those investors are because they refuse to tell us, which is kind of unfortunate because we would like to know that information. They also have a habit of forming a whole lot of LLCs to kind of hide behind, really, rather than just presenting themselves as Summit Carbon Solutions. So they formed, well, let me just count on the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like six LLCs. And that's just in Iowa. They have other ones in the other states. And they also have separate LLCs for all of the capture portion of this technology. So needless to say, it's a lot. And it's kind of overwhelming, frankly. But if you want to know exactly where this pipeline is going to be, this is like a wide overview. In general, it's, like I said, about 2,500 miles throughout the Midwest. And in Iowa alone, we're looking at a little over 1,000 miles. So it's a hefty project. And if you look at the screen, so up this is actually a second pipeline that's being proposed for Iowa by a different company. That is actually being proposed by a Canadian company known as Wolf Carbon Solutions. They actually had their permit denied in Illinois because it's about like a 300-mile pipeline that stretches into Illinois to store carbon underground there. And Illinois wasn't having it. They turned them down. So Iowa is really just, we are lagging behind compared to our neighbors because we refuse to say no, I guess. But so that pipeline is kind of in a weird stage where they're still trying to get easements and they're still trying to build, but they're moving pretty slow, as opposed to Summit, who is certainly, they've made a lot of, recently, a lot of new, quick moving kind of steps, I would say, despite the fact that we have managed to delay them for at least 3 years now. But this kind of shows you a little bit more detail where the pipeline in Iowa is intended. So I don't know why that says phase 3. I messed that up. But basically, originally Summit only proposed a 688-mile pipeline. And so that's this first one here. And again, we oppose that too. It's kind of like the same deal, but there was also a second pipeline company that was trying to come through. We got them denied. They canceled their plan. So they dropped out of the game. Summit stepped in, bought up all of their easements, and now they've added new about 300 miles of pipeline to their proposed route. So what that means is this section of the pipeline, all of this 300 miles, has not gone before like any sort of permitting authority. They've really done nothing with it yet. That's about to start. But this first phase, this is what we've been going through for the past 3 years. We've really been coordinating with landowners. We've filed lawsuits. We've been sued. We've gone through the Iowa Utilities Board hearing process. And just back in June, on June 25th, the Iowa Utilities Board did approve this route with conditions, and they also approved them for the use of eminent domain, which I'll touch on in just a minute. But so it's kind of strange because like you look at this is both routes put together. That kind of looks like one pipeline system, right? Like that's one just project. It's all being run by the same company, but it's not. It's being approved in basically this is our first approval. And then each one of these lines, they have their own separate hearings before the Iowa Utilities Board, all of that. So at the end of the day, it becomes like 16 separate pipelines, 15 separate pipelines, something like that, which just makes for a very complicated, unwieldy disaster, frankly, but that's where we are. Trying to think, this is kind of, yeah, just your general overview. But
before you leave that map, Emma, could you go back
Yep.
and show to the left the little diagonal line that looks like a nose, that part of it up on phase 2, that portion.
Oh, this one.
There you go. That's for the rest of you. That's the Greene and Guthrie County piece that I'll be talking about later, just so you can see where it is. And then we're on phase 3, which shows phase 1 and 2 together, shows the entire project.
Yep. And so you can see that even before this phase 2, there was a portion of the pipeline that was destined for Greene County. Yeah. And fortunately, we've certainly seen folks that have not signed easements there, which has been really great, just being able to stand strong. But so there's obviously been a lot of resistance to this project. I'm going to kind of dive into these more in depth in just a minute, but like the top kind of main reasons that we see people oppose this pipeline are, number one, eminent domain abuse. We've done polling on this issue just recently, and across all of the states that are impacted by the Summit pipeline, we're talking like over 80% of people oppose the use of eminent domain for carbon pipelines. And that's all sides of the aisle, which is one of the, I think, kind of the most interesting things about this fight, is because it has just been able to unite people that normally you wouldn't see working together. So it's definitely fascinating in that aspect. The kind of next most common issue that we see, like bringing people into this and why they don't want the pipeline, is the safety concerns. We have seen, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of issues relating to potential ruptures and that sort of nature associated with the carbon pipeline, and frankly also the sequestration sites, as well as the capture facilities themselves. So all around, kind of a dangerous scheme that doesn't really benefit anybody in Iowa, unless your name is Bruce Frastetter, who happens to own Summit. Then the next kind of most common topic that we hear being discussed, and that really gets people motivated, is the destruction that this could do to our land, as well as the insane, just absolutely insane amounts of water that is required to actually run this technology. And then last, I'm not even going to try and say what I wrote on the screen for number 4, because that's going to be a tongue twister and it'll just not come out of my mouth right. But basically, we have seen throughout this process that there's just a lot of kind of shadiness going around, and a lot of our tax dollars that are going to fund said shadiness. But to dive into that first point, when it comes to like our property rights and eminent domain, we just saw some new figures come out, and this is what they are. So back on Summit's original route, which was that 688-mile original route that was proposed back in 2021, there were at the start of the Iowa Utilities Board like hearing process, the process that like allows them to get a permit, there was 859 parcels that they needed to use eminent domain on if they were to build this pipeline, which is absolutely just bonkers. We've never seen that many parcels being, potentially facing condemnation in Iowa history. So turned into the IUB only denying eminent domain on 4 of those parcels. That brought us down to 855 parcels that were facing condemnation, which is, again, still the most parcels in the history of Iowa that we've seen facing eminent domain. And also just frankly, very disconcerting that the IUB only found 4 parcels out of almost 900 that they didn't think a pipeline should be routed on. Then since almost a year now, Summit has been, continuing to try and secure voluntary easements. So those are the easements that they aren't taking by force, but that they're, approaching a landowner, negotiating, and the landowner ends up signing an easement and allowing Summit onto their property. They have managed to obtain a whopping 3 easements from a single landowner in nearly a year, which I think really just speaks to how united and dedicated the folks that are refusing to sign easements are. I think it's just fascinating because I was really anticipating that we would lose some folks just because it's a lot of stress. It's a lot to try and kind of carry and deal with, but especially when you're talking about 3 years now that the threat of eminent domain has been hanging over people's head. But only one person went for it, and that's, I think, phenomenal. With that, Summit did end up making their own kind of adjustments and reroutes. And so now we lost another 4 parcels, which congrats to those 4 landowners for sure. But that in total then brings us down to 848 parcels that are going to face condemnation because of this pipeline, which is huge. I've never seen anything like it before. And that all of those numbers, they don't include that phase 2. There's still 300 miles of parcels that don't have a single easement on them yet. So we really have a pretty strong opposition and a fairly good shot, I think, at stopping the Summit project just because of the power of landowners uniting together and saying, no, you're not going to take my land. I don't want this. And that's it. So I think that's just really reaffirming, especially when we hear Summit likes to, kind of tout as if this project is guaranteed, as if the cake is already baked. And I don't think it is. In Iowa, let alone South Dakota or North Dakota, I mean, we've got a really, really good fight going on here. Touched on a little bit of the safety concerns, but just so folks are aware, if you didn't already know, carbon dioxide is invisible, it's odorless, you can't taste it, it's non-flammable, and all of that together kind of means that should a pipeline rupture, basically you would not know that you were being surrounded by carbon potentially. It tends to kind of form a bit of like a white foggy cloud, I guess, but if that happened in your sleep, you'd have no idea because you can't smell it, you can't taste it. Like it's heavier than air, so it displaces all of that oxygen and you asphyxiate basically. And if you don't, there's still a large number of other possibilities, from a long-term brain injury to burns to issues with like respiratory issues. That's the word I was looking for, respiratory. There's respiratory issues and all sorts of long-term side effects. What we saw in Mississippi with the pipeline that ruptured down there is that a number of the folks that were impacted to this day continue to have memory problems. I mean, some of them can't even hold a job anymore. So it's really just a bad deal. And it's also because, like I mentioned before, since it's so highly pressurized, it can create a pretty violent rupture of the pipeline if that were to be the case. Like it just basically splits the pipeline for hundreds of yards or meters. I mean, it's insane and frankly quite terrifying, because that just means even more carbon is coming out at a very just in a violent way basically. And yeah, that's kind of your basics. And I mentioned that I was going to talk about this. So they say that these pipelines are really safe, right? They're tested and true technology. Sure. If you call over 102 incidences in the past 20 years, a safe experience, because that's really not the case. All of these pictures are from real life pipelines, except this one was a test rupture that they did, but that's kind of what I was talking about when I mentioned the pipeline just basically unzippering for hundreds of meters. And making for a very dangerous situation. This pipeline is the Cortez pipeline, and that is all just from erosion. That's not being excavated or anything. That's just what has happened with the land. It's terrifying. And it's certainly something that we would face here in Iowa, just given our geology and winters and everything else. Here are just some pictures from the Dakota Access Pipeline when we talk about land damage, because we saw land damage with that pipeline. And honestly, what we know of Summit is they're using a lot of the same contractors. Like when it comes to tile, they're using the exact same contractor that Dakota Access did. They're using a lot of the same county inspectors. And so based on that, we can kind of anticipate that should this pipeline be approved and go through, we would be facing this kind of same trend really of just absolutely no care, just completely disregarding the compaction of the soil and the future like viability of the land really. And this, talking about soil compaction, this slide shows you exactly how compacted this land is. I don't know if you can see it on my screen, it's kind of hidden, but you can see on the right of way, you can barely get a shovel into the dirt because it's been so compacted by all the heavy equipment driving over the soil. Whereas you're off the right of way, that shovel is nearly all the way in the ground because the soil hasn't faced that same compaction. It hasn't been driven on when it's wet and everything else. So it's really just, it's a concerning future that we're facing if this pipeline is allowed, because you're talking over 1,000 miles of Iowa farmland that is going to face long-term destruction. This isn't, soil compaction like that isn't something that just fixes itself, you know, in a couple of years. This is long-term. And as you can see in this picture, it will affect yields. And I think, Chris, you were mentioning just before we hopped on, Summit's only willing to pay you for what, full price for your crop loss 1 year? What is it?
1 year. The second year, it's about half. And the third year, it's about a quarter. So, yeah. And you see the crop impact. And with this kind of compaction, that especially my kind of farming where I do no tillage, it's going to take years to get it back to being no-tilled where we can plan on a crop.
Awful. And after those first 3 years, then there's no restitution.
No payment whatsoever. No payment whatsoever. Unlike, where was it you said, the tall grass one in Nebraska, where they already had a pipeline and where they are going to share some of their tax credits with the farmers or with the people whose property they're destroying.
It's a shame. And I think that's, I mean, kind of par for the course from what we've seen from Summit, though, is to them, this is all about money and making sure it's going into their pocket, not anybody else's. And it's just bad behavior all around that we've seen from them. Speaking of money, I guess, this slide just shows you exactly how much of our tax dollars have gone into this industry since the very beginning. This really started back in the 1980s. If you guys remember clean coal, I know clean coal was talked about a lot, like back in like, I don't know, 2016-ish, and everybody was laughing at Donald Trump saying clean coal doesn't exist. Well, I mean, it doesn't work, but it does exist in some way, shape, or form, I guess. And that's really where this funding started, and it's just completely steamrolled from there. We are looking at billions and billions of dollars every year going to this industry that has not been proven to work. In fact, of the existing carbon capture facilities in the US, all of them have, not one of them has ever managed to actually capture as much carbon as they thought they would. In fact, most of the proposals that are put forth for like new carbon capture plants and whatnot, they don't even end up being constructed because it's not economically viable and the technology just isn't there. And even if it was there, frankly, moving pollution from one spot to another doesn't mean that there's no longer pollution. It still exists. And so it's just this terribly illogical plan that exists entirely to get money from taxpayers at, no cost to them, no risk really. And yeah, that's kind of that. So this is actually the process of how a pipeline gets approved in Iowa. So it's long. I'm not going to read all these words, but you can see phase one. So that first 688-mile pipeline, it did get approved back in June, and we are now in the appeal process, kind of waiting on the IUB to tell us if they will consider it for rehearing. If they don't, then we will go ahead and appeal that to district court, which I'm sure will then make its way to the Iowa Supreme Court, which is similar to what we saw with the Dakota Access Pipeline, but hopefully with a better ending. And then if you consider the additional 300 miles that Summit just recently proposed, they are way back at the start of things. And so we have to go through this about 15 more times in order to get through all of their newly proposed routes, which is bonkers. But lots of time. This is definitely not something that's going to happen overnight, and hopefully it's not going to happen ever. Then there's also, once a pipeline has been approved, this is the whole process for going through condemnation and what that looks like. There's a lot of different steps, but basically everything kind of leaves the hands of the IUB, the Iowa Utilities Board, and your local county will take over, and a compensation committee will be there to appraise the value of your land. And if you don't like that appraisal, you are always able to take it to court and all sorts of different things. But basically, all of this is to say it's not over, and there is a lot of time left before we get anything even close to a decision on this. I think one of the most exciting things is actually happening outside of Iowa, where in South Dakota, they have ballot measures. And so they've actually got this issue onto the ballot come November. And the people of South Dakota get to vote on whether or not a pipeline is going to be going through their properties. And based on our polling, it's looking pretty good. Summit has already invested, I want to say, like over $150,000 just into like a media campaign from the very start. But I don't think it's going to matter, because the people on the ground are just so fiercely against this for all of the reasons that I've discussed. And I'm looking forward to that, because if we can stop it in South Dakota, we stop it in Iowa. And that's the same for, if we're able to stop it in Iowa, we stop it for South Dakota. They have to get to North Dakota somehow. And as far as I know, you got to go through South Dakota to get there. So Chris, take it away. I feel like I've done nothing but run my mouth really fast for too long now. So
Are you all done with your slides, Emma?
I think so. Yep. It's not going forward. So
Okay. Fantastic. That is amazing. I learned so much already from you. So we're grateful to have you here with us this evening. So fantastic. And let's hear from Chris. And we do have some questions popping up, but I just asked everybody to continue to put them in the chat box, and then we can also raise hands afterwards. But let's get Chris to give us an update on all of her efforts in Guthrie and Greene County.
So there is a question in the chat box that even for me is still kind of out there. And
Okay.
this one came from Carrie, and she said, why did she think that Summit had secured part of the parcels that they needed? And isn't that true that some people did sign voluntary easements, Emma?
yeah, absolutely. They have. But I will say Summit has some pretty interesting math skills. How they do math is not how I do math. And so they have a long history of kind of cherry picking numbers and making sure that it looks better than it really is.
Okay, so we don't know really how many parcels they started with, and all we do know is that 854 parcels, not people particularly, but parcels, are still out there that would have to be condemned for them to even do what they think they want to do in phase one.
Exactly. And I will say, typically, when we've seen pipelines stop before, it only takes about 25% of landowners holding out, which I don't want to, toot my own horn, but we're definitely there.
Okay.
Wow.
All right. Okay, so there is, like Emma said, there is a small part of pipeline that was proposed in 2020 in Greene County that comes down out of Webster County to our ethanol plant, which is a Louis Dreyfus plant by Grand Junction. In fact, close enough to Grand Junction to be within the kill zone. Grand Junction is a town of about 500 people. Now, not everybody would be within that half a mile kill zone, but they would be as close as Sartasia in Mississippi, which was a mile from the town until, and the leak or explosion or rupture, whatever words you want to use, where CO2 escaped in such quantity that it was dangerous. So I have to say that I was like many Iowans in 2020. I was not for the pipeline, but it didn't come anywhere near me. And it looked like it was going to take a long time. It's taken 3 years for them to have their hearings, to try to get people to sign up, so forth and so on. It's taken the legislature actually having passed it by a wide margin that you could not use eminent domain unless you had 90% of the people signed up. It's taken, and Emma mentioned this one. Emma, you might want to unshare your screen.
It's still sharing?
No, you're off.
Oh,
We're off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Chris, you're maybe it's stuck on your, but we're all
Okay, all right. If you're all in on, okay, I'm fine. Anyway, so it's taken 3 years for the, almost 4, for the IUB to end up being all appointed by the same governor, all chosen for the same reason that we all feel was to pass this, to pass eminent domain for private gain. And so we've all been kind of just like going, and thinking. And then in March of 2024, Summit announced this extra 380 miles and put out these weird maps that you really can't tell whether your land is one of the parcels or not. You can kind of guess, and then you can kind of guess, and then you can talk to your neighbors. Well, or you can find out more. And that's what we started doing. We looked at those maps. We found out that we were on the docket with Guthrie County. Lots of you know about White Rock Conservancy, and you may even know about a prairie that is an original prairie that's very near White Rock. It appears that this new set of pipeline maps show that White Rock and this prairie, John Judson original prairie, are right in the way of this pipeline that goes from Grand Junction to very near between Coon Rapids and Baird at the intersection of Greene, Guthrie, and Carroll counties. And it's a poet plant there that employs 40 people. And it goes from there to Menlo and just barely skirts Dunbar Slough, which is on the plan to be a federal wildlife area, and then White Rock, which is a private land conservancy of close to 6,000 acres, and then Spring Lake Park, which is a state park, which is very near Guthrie Center, and then into Menlo, several small little burgs, I'm going to call them, on the way, and then into Menlo, where the Poet Plant is on the edge of town, in the town of Menlo. So when Liz and I realized and got the maps from Emma and Sierra Club, from Bold Alliance and Sierra Club, who have been wonderful in tracking this and keeping people active and fighting it and not signing easements and all of that. When we got the maps that you could measure how far you were from the pipeline, and we had names and addresses of those people, because not because Summit gives you that, not because Summit makes that public, but because Sierra Club and Bold Alliance know how to do the algorithms on the map. You can actually see where it crosses the Raccoon River, where it crosses the tributaries of the Raccoon River here in Greene County, so close to my pet project, which is called Save Squirrel Hollow, that it was like, okay, not only is it going to go right next to my brother-in-law's house, my neighbor's house, it's going to go right next to my farm pond, it's going to go through all of the trees that are on this bluff above Squirrel Hollow. And it's like, no, and it's not going to go through White Rock, because Liz says, no, it's not. And what we did is we took Emma's great map and great list of people, and I'm calling it Emma's because that's who I worked with, Emma and Jess Mazur. We took their map and their list, and we sent 800 and some postcards to people who, and the postcard says, you are getting this, you have questions about a pipeline, question mark, question mark. You are getting this postcard because your property has been identified as on or near this pipeline. And we want to tell you what we know from 3 years of working with it. And so we sent 800 and some postcards to the, now I keep saying it's parcels, not people. And a parcel is generally for 40 acres if it's farmland. So, or less if your parcel happens to be like a 20-acre parcel or whatever. But some people got as many as 30 letters, $10.72 certified letters saying you are on this pipeline route or in the corridor. And I got 2, but you don't know until you go to Summit's meeting, which isn't till the end of the month, which parcel. I mean, it could be my house parcel. I don't think so, but it could be my house parcel, could be one. It could be my pond. It could just be plain land, but I don't care. Even if it's my pond, I'm within the kill zone. And Liz's house is within the kill zone. It's not all 66 or 5,600 acres that are in the kill zone, but her house is in the kill zone. So the cool part about having 3 years of experience, having 3 years of knowledge, is that we're out ahead of Summit in talking to people. So we think we can keep the voluntary signing of easements down to even under 50%. And if we can do that, we can delay. We can support the people who did not sign in phase one so that they can continue to delay, so that they can afford to fight the good fight and take every single condemnation through the legal process that slows it down. 859 condemnations processes is a lot. And like Emma said, we can hope for South Dakota not passing or saying no to the pipeline. We can hope that North Dakota doesn't come through with a yes on an application, because as far as I know, Summit has not applied a second time. North Dakota did not approve their first application. Summit has not applied a second time as of yet. And the other thing is, they don't have any place to put the CO2 when if they were ever to get it there right now. We had meetings, we sent out the postcards, and we had meetings last week. In fact, last week, all I did was talk anti-pipeline. Jess Mazur came with a presentation very similar to this one. And in Guthrie County, they got 500 postcards, went to Guthrie, and we had 200 people show up. And 3 supervisors from Guthrie County out of their 5, and several candidates. We didn't have Steve King. We did have Steve Kenkel, who is the chairman of the Board of Supervisors in Shelby County. They wrote the first county ordinance against the pipeline. There aren't any rules how close to your house, how close to a road, how close to the bike trail, how close to the river these pipelines can be. There aren't any rules. Summit says, oh, they're safe. Oh, federal rules apply. Well, feds said, no, we don't have rules that apply. The counties can enforce them. And Summit is actually suing counties who wrote ordinances. So there's that whole thing that's up in the air as well. So you might hear in my voice that I felt like 200 people out of 500 parcels was good. In Jefferson, the other 300 postcards and parcels, we had 75 people, but that was after I had also been to the Board of Supervisors last week and to the Rotarians and talked to lots and lots of people in smaller groups. I just happened to be a VP at the county Democrats, and it is in our platform that we oppose pipelines. And so the Greene County Democrats helped us put on the meeting in Jefferson. But I have to say to you, the meeting that got me fired up, that got Liz and I fired up, was the strangest meeting that you would ever expect to hear me be at. I went to a free soil meeting. I knew that former Congressman Steve King was the featured speaker, and we knew that other Republicans were on the docket. And they said, and we said, isn't it odd that both red and blue, both D and R people are in the same room for the same reason? And indeed, it was odd, and I never thought I would say, oh, I agreed with everything he said, but it's unconstitutional, this business of eminent domain for private use. And it turns out our Greene County attorney agrees, and our county has filed an objection on now we already knew that it filed the objection for the first phase. They are updating that letter so that it goes towards all new dockets, all 16 dockets, and they are adding safety. They are adding the concept of it running through drainage districts, which hits my other hotspot on water and on saving our Raccoon River. And so anyway, I feel good. I don't know that I feel like we're going to stop it immediately. I think we're going to have a whole lot of hassle going forward. And I think we have to keep activating and keep getting the word out there.
That is amazing, Chris. Wow. You guys, I mean, this is just such an informative conversation. I think everybody else would agree. I think there's one of the questions in the chat box got answered, but Shelley Meyer had Dakota County has been where did that go? Has tabled the CUP for Summit, which is the gatekeeper to county, the gatekeeper county into Nebraska. Their reason is nothing is happening in the Dakotas. That was
good. That's great. And I
Okay.
see Mark Davis is asking about the money Summit has paid to Feenstra and Governor Reynolds. The rumor or
And Emma answered it.
Oh, she did?
Yeah, the number from 2023 is 160 for Reynolds and 8,000 for Feenstra, but they've been utilizing super PACs too, so they don't really have the complete figures.
So we were contacted, Liz and I were contacted by a guy from California who was working on another video separate from Bold Alliance's video. And they were working to put it on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s website. And he claimed that last year at the fair that Bruce Rastetter had promised Governor Reynolds $1.9 million. Okay, but you don't see that. It's like Emma says, you don't see that in this because of the super PACs, so you don't see it. But
Transparency is not Summit's strong suit at all. We've learned that for sure. Which actually, this is one of the things I wanted to mention that I kind of forgot about. We've been going through. Summit is required by the IUB to make all of these modifications to certain parcels along the original route that they were approved for. So, for example, on one person's parcel, they were required to bore underneath like the virgin prairie. On another person's parcel, they're not allowed to remove any of the trees. Well, if you go and actually read the new easement Summit has submitted for those parcels, for every parcel that requires boring, not once is it mentioned in the easement. Not once. You don't see it ever appear. For the parcel that they're not allowed to remove trees from. Well, they commit to not removing trees, like cutting down trees or anything, but they do reserve the right to remove root systems, which I don't know a tree that survives without roots. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. They are trying every which way they can to find loopholes and basically have their way without actually, while still following the IUB's orders, which is just scummy, frankly. And that's why we call them scummy, because that's how they act.
That's just amazing. So there's a few other comments. James has a comment. I think it's more the comment than a question. Bremer County is gathering signatures on a petition for the dissent on the DNR permit issued for the use of groundwater for the pipeline. We're looking for a contact in the DNR who we can present these signatures. So anybody know about?
I think that I would take it straight to Kayla Lyons. That's who we sent. Remember, the Sparks sent a letter to Kayla Lyons about something on the Nishnabotna. That's the best place when you have a group action, taking it straight to the top and making a deal about it in the newspaper as
Yeah.
well. So didn't we do both?
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
yeah, you could actually, that's a good idea, Chris. So James, to get that letter directly dropped off to her office and then make a copy of it and put it in the newspaper, send it to the Des Moines Register or
Carol, isn't it Carol Hunter at the Des Moines Register? And then you want to make sure to follow up with Carol Hunter to see if anybody's heard from Kayla Lyons, or if Carol Hunter, the other place to also put it would be in the Iowa Capital Dispatch. And if you aren't following, the Cedar Rapids Gazette does a good job on keeping track of things. But if you need something background, go to iowacapitaldispatch.com. It's free. It's not paywalled. And Jared Strong, the reporter there, knows what he's talking about and really writes it for real. He doesn't. Okay, Emma, you had
Jared just got hired by the Gazette, actually, so I think he's leaving.
Yeah, he
Oh
did.
no! Oh no! Well, now you'll have to subscribe to the Gazette because he's darn good.
Yes, he is.
And then Dale has a comment too. Remind me what the payback per CO2 ton that Summit would get from the government.
Yeah, so it depends on if you're using the carbon for enhanced oil recovery or for storage purposes. But if you are, like Summit, just going to sequester it underground, for every ton of carbon that you store, you would get $75. And that, amount, Summit's claiming that they're going to move around 16 million metric tons per year. So you do the math on that, because it is a lot of money, obscene gobs of money. Yeah.
That they're not sharing with people whose land they're ruining to get it there either.
So someone just posted that Jared Strong has an article in the Gazette today, and yeah, that article deals with Summit purchasing Navigator's rights to those phase 2 tunnels that Emma was sharing with us earlier. So that's their next round of what they're going to try to do is pull those Navigator routes into under their umbrella, and then work that crowd just like they're working Chris and her group down in the Greene County area. So the Ikes have been very vocal about this. We don't have a lot of funding to provide legal support, but we certainly have been vocal. And I would ask anybody to write a letter to the Gazette, register Iowa Dispatch, your local papers as well, and just keep up the visibility of this debacle of a project. And what we do with our 55% of the corn in Iowa goes to ethanol. Maybe we should just quit growing corn for ethanol and start growing food for folks instead. So just my
Yes.
So
On that fact of growing corn, there are a couple of things corn growers can continue to do. One, they can put pressure on the ethanol plant and sell back into the regular market. Or two, they can ask for their corn checkoff back. And it will send a message to the corn growers marketing group that we don't think Summit Pipeline should happen to get our money. So those are two ways that a farmer can push back besides not passing an easement or not signing an easement. The other thing, Emma, help me with the link. Every person on this call can make their objection to the IUB. I object to CO2 pipelines because whatever your reason is to object. You can object to this docket. You don't have to be a landowner. You don't have to be on the pipeline route. You can object. And can you put that in the chat or when?
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be great. Be super to have it right now.
Working on it. I know. There we go.
Do we have any other questions in the group? Boy, we've got like 23 people on, which is fantastic. That's how many we had registered just around 6 o'clock. So that's great. Does anybody, any other questions?
One thing I wanted to mention quick too is going back to Summit buying navigators easements. That's really one of the most concerning things about this is because in Iowa, at least, these are forever easements. So who knows who could own that pipeline 10 years from now, let alone 100 years from now. I mean, when you sign an easement, you are impacting not only your land and your life, but your children's and your grandchildren's land and their life and your legacy all around, which is just, it's a lot to take on. And we've seen with carbon pipelines, I mean, just the ones that exist, they transfer hands a lot. I mean, there's one I'm thinking of in particular. I bet it's been owned by 6, 7 different companies just in the past couple of years. And a lot of times it's, you know, just a kind of a front for the larger company on its own. Like, it's the way they've kind of navigated this system in almost every state to be able to kind of hide who they are so that they don't have to really hold any liability should something happen is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
That's just super information. And we're super grateful to have this be like top and center. We feel like we're talking to the direct, like we're getting a sneak preview of what's going to be in tomorrow's paper in advance. As you know, Dale pointed out, Jared Strong's article was about what you were just sharing with us. So that's pretty cool. And James put in a link to the Free Soil Foundation. He said it's a great grassroots effort to fight this. And then Shelley, her parents have a Century Farm that's going to be split in half by Navigator. She's really sick about that, and we felt bad about that too. Does anybody else, would anybody else like to say some final comments or have any questions for Emma or Chris or Dale or anybody else this evening? So super, super grateful. Thank you everybody for your time, and Emma and Chris for all the countless hours. We're just, it's incredible. And we're super grateful because people do have the power. Just like the Izaak Walton League 100 years ago got together and advocated to have the preservation of the refuge of the Upper Mississippi River Wildlife and Fish Refuge that it protects 261 miles between Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. It was about people and the power of people 100 years ago. And again, we're still fighting so many things to help our natural environment. So thank you.
That's a good question of Lee's before we just go. We don't have ballot measures in Iowa. I don't know what we would have to do to get the legislature to do something about that. We do have the way to do constitutional amendments, and we do have, or currently, we had a Republican legislature, the House, pass the bill that we thought we needed. But it didn't get out of committee in the Senate. So your votes this fall are going to make a difference for Iowa Senate. And hopefully we can make some changes there. And hopefully we can in the time the next one rolls around, we will be able to make some difference in even the governorship. So it's a matter of public opinion and public activation and keeping the pressure on.
Gratitude. Thanks, everybody. And yep, like Chris said, your representatives need to know that this matters. Clean water matters and pipelines matter. So have a great week, everybody. And we will be back next month with our next program, which is going to be about salt watch and water issues associated with oversalting our waterways. Have a beautiful evening. Thanks again, Emma and Chris and Dale and company. We'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.